Thanks, everyone. We're going to do a little bit of a Donahue session here with a couple of my guests. We're going to start out with my colleague Craig Atkinson, who's Chief Operating Officer and Chief Digital Officer at PhD. We'll do a 10-minute discussion with him about the topic of native programmatic, question mark or exclamation point, and then we will move on to the same topic with Oleg Korenfeld, who is the SVP of Ad Tech and Platforms at MediaVest. And then we'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A discussion with all of you. So without further ado, thank you both for joining me here on stage. I know, Craig, before we get into another exercise of buzzword bingo, I know that native is the latest. It's late in the day, so it's time to introduce another new shiny term for our audience. I wanted to step back and ask you a little bit about the changing nature of the agency. And I know, before we just dive in and talk about this new feature that clients like yours are interested in working more with, maybe, I know you brought a couple of slides with you. Could we get those up on screen?
Sure. So I increasingly find myself speaking to both our own folks as well as clients about the nature that if you're in this room, but if you're in marketing, you're in change management. That ultimately is your job. And because consumers, fueled through technology, are changing the landscape so fast and at an accelerating rate. So trying to explain logarithmic change is not always easy. And so as a result, the aspiration that we always hold ourselves to is, are we acting and delivering as in an interconnected way as the consumer we're trying to reach, right? And so we're always playing catch up to those folks. And as a result, really specifically on the media side, we all grew up producing lots and lots of Excel sheets that look like flowcharts, right? That showed very clearly what you're going to buy and how much it costs, et cetera. The problem is that's just woefully inadequate now to show what's happening in the marketplace, because beyond just having expertise in any one of these channels, and you can see in the illustration, we definitely start to group them in like terms, right? So like sound and motion and audio and whatnot. Not only because the worlds are changing so much, but there's new stuff popping up all the time. So we're trying to find the highest order. But increasingly, we find beyond just expertise in those disciplines, it's the interconnection points where you win, right? So yes, it's important to be great at all these individual channels, but if you're just great at delivering television, you're not going to win. Like, you need to have what's the single most important thing on this slide is the gray box, which is the data platform that enables it all. And we see increasingly that programmatic, a term with many different meanings for many different people, is the glue that holds all these channels together and makes them better and optimizes them. So
clearly, programmatic and data go hand in hand, and I'm sure, I know there's been a lot of talk about programmatic and maybe more broadly technology-driven buying here today. I guess the question here, and maybe we can ask for your definition, when you hear the word native, you're talking about all these different touch points that you guys are, your clients are intersecting with their clients. Data is being generated from all these touch points. Certainly that makes sense that programmatic plays a role there, but what about native? First of all, what does native mean for you? It's a squishy term. How do you define it when a client comes to you and says, hey, Craig, we want to buy more native?
Yeah, so it's funny. I think it's contextually different, right? So if a client comes and says, I want to buy more native, that means someone's probably sold them something really interesting, or they are maniacally focused on driving some increased result, usually getting noticed, right? So increasingly we're seeing that a lot of the standard units are hiding in plain sight, and we see these new units popping up, which maybe the audience has yet to figure out a way of tuning those out. So it's this arms race of notice, and increasingly it's that. Also, we hear from the internally within the agency, we hear native and we think, okay, that's a new term that we need to figure out, we need to assess, and find a new way to evaluate it.
So let's get concrete. What would be an example of a client of yours that you guys have sort of stepped down this path of exploring a native set of campaigns with? Can you give an example of someone who's actually done something successfully?
So I'm a little bit of a traditionalist when it comes to native. I mean, natives have been around since soap operas. But more importantly, I think native means having the brand be involved in a relationship between the media owner, the brand, and a consumer. And GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, is one of our big clients, and you may have noticed some yellowness out there in the world, that allergy season, which is as bad as it gets this year, which ironically is not terrible if you have a very popular allergy product. When you partner with one of the largest weather companies in the world, to actually build something that's never been done before, right? So in this case, we had meteorologists sitting down with allergists and really coming up with something really interesting, really custom, et cetera. That's more of a, I would say, what we've done in the digital space for a long time is finding these really interesting intersection points. Now, what's not possible today, but I would love, and I know the clients would be really interested in, is when you go to the site and you see that experience, that's great. But if I'm not an allergy sufferer, I'm not going to buy a product. So as a result, if someday I could somehow, through the use of programmatic or some data, actually activate that in a way that only showed that custom relationship to someone who might become a customer, that would be hugely valuable, right? I think we're a long way from that today.
Yeah. Well, can we ask, we have one more slide here from Craig that I wanted to move forward on that talks a bit about this user experience and mapping to all these different touch points. I guess, so I totally get how that involves programmatic, how the Weather Channel can understand that, where pollen counts are highest in North America, and you could target folks who maybe search for, allergy and sort of combine these different data points for addressable audiences. But maybe, to push a bit on it, where does native fit in there? How would you guys, and Oleg, if you want to, I see you getting antsy to say something.
Look, at the end of the day, we're media agencies, right? Our job is to spend our clients' dollars as efficiently as possible. Programmatic, if done correctly, gives us that opportunity to leverage understanding of the audience to buy the media as efficiently as possible. Native, the way it's positioned today, is another creative type. So I could buy desktop, mobile, display, video. Why not put native in the same bucket as far as the type of a creative that I'm exposing in whatever environment that happens to be to a set of audience that I predefined that has the best chances to get the optimization that I want.
Well, I think I'd go back to the arms race analogy to say we are all desperately trying to gain the attention of consumers who are increasingly figuring out how to tune us out, right? So it's this incredible race to that. And in my view, native allows you to be in a space that feels indistinguishable from what you would think of as edit, right? And so as a result, in the example of the Weather Channel and GSK, it's an actual pollen cast. You have a very hard time, even for a savvy consumer, understanding who's bringing you what, and at the end of the day, you're just happy to have it. These maps that we build are our way of trying to manage the chaos of how much consumers are changing, as well as how many different specialists, right? So to run in a connected fashion, ironically, requires a tremendous amount of specialty. It's just all harnessed together at the point of activation. So that's why we need a map to figure that out.
And so in the case of the Weather Channel, are you doing both buying on the Weather Channel properties themselves as well as extending and leveraging some of their data to buy off property?
Yeah, all of the above.
Okay.
As well as interesting connections with the content that comes off the site as well. So.
Okay, yeah. Interesting. So I do know the Weather Channel's always been kind of on the forefront of a lot of these things. So I guess there's clearly some benefits. What are the bottlenecks? So, okay, let's say you've got more of your pharma clients coming to you and say, hey, we've heard great news about some of these allergy medicines flying off the shelves with some of these native programmatic media buys. What's the bottleneck that you see as a media buyer to greater embrace of this new technology?
So there's no lack of interest, right? It's more about the sheer logistics of pulling something off of that. And I bring it up as an example of an extreme case, right? So, when you get scientists from different companies together just to talk about what's involved, that's not normally what goes into, sending out an IO, right? And so the hurdles to doing it, I think, are as long as they are equal to the output that you get, right? So this is a terrific program. The issue that I have, and one of the things we were talking about backstage and in other calls, is when you put those words programmatic and native together. My question is it a slippery slope of results or is it a cliff? I don't know, right? So as soon as you give up control, as soon as you harness back that authenticity, I'm not sure where we end up.
So I'm gonna switch over to Oleg now for a bit to maybe talk a little bit about how you guys are thinking at Starcom Media Group about these things. When you think about the intersection of native and programmatic, what happens at the intersection? What's unique about having either one of those by themselves?
We like to go to extremes. It's either programmatic or either native. It's not, like as I said before, native is another way to bring some kind of a message to my client, hoping to get the engagement that I want. So in that sense, when you're strategizing and you don't even think about it first as like, I want to do a native ad. No, I have a specific goal. There's a certain way I want to deliver some kind of a message to my client. A lot of it is the content that we're now producing. Marketers becoming content producers themselves, and they want to distribute that content, obviously, and they want to distribute it in the ways that are natural, and people feel like they're not being forced to see it.
So I know, Craig, one of your hallmark clients is HBO, and I know at MediaVest you guys have Comcast. I think we do have another slide that I want to put up here that you prepared for us to tell a little bit of a story around how native programmatic was being used for one of your hallmark clients, Oleg. Walk us through what this campaign was, and maybe give, again, this is a concrete example of something that's actually out there in the wild.
Sure. So again, we weren't planning to build a native ad at all. And the goal was, the issue that we're trying to solve was Comcast has video on demand product. They wanted people to get excited about the shows they potentially missed from the night before. So that's why it's called fear of missing out. The shows that were popular.
FOMO.
FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. The shows from the night before, if you weren't around to see it in prime time, don't worry. Log into Comcast video on demand product and catch up on the shows. So how do you get people excited about doing that, especially when you think about cord cutters, when you think about people consuming content in very, very different ways right now. So the idea kind of came together, and we only decided that it potentially could be a native or custom content, more like an ad, when the idea came together. So in the concept of anything can be content, absolutely anything can be content. So could the ratings. So the ratings from the night before that we can get directly from Nielsen through an API potentially could become a piece of content. So if we know which shows were not only the highest rated from the night before, but which shows were mostly tweeted about or just had a big social kind of call out the night before, we can also tie it to which categories, which demographics those shows most fit into. That is the segment that becomes something that can be targeted in programmatic. So the creative itself became this kind of collaboration of the overnight ratings built to render only to a set of people that we decided to show. So behind the scenes, we create a bunch of if-then statements. If the segment says males 18-35 who are into dramas, only the shows that would show up from the night before would fit into that category. The way to do that would be to pass the DMP segments directly into the creative. And that's kind of what made it custom and native, because to a user, it's very easy experience. They're loading an ad. We know ahead of time which shows potential to have the best reaction to. Nielsen is telling us which shows from the night before, because we update this every 24 hours on the flight, which shows best fit that category. And Comcast, because they have rights to the logos, to thumbnails of all those shows, provided the actual imagery for the creative. So you bring these three pieces together, and the results we had were amazing. Like you can see on the slide, if you add just these, we had about 20 variations of these if-then statements, but those 20 variations created over 5 million creative variations that were delivered to people around the web. The performance was completely unexpected. We also ran standard media around promoting the same products at the same time, and performance was over 250% higher.
So, I think in this case, this is a great example of where native has worked for, a marquee client. I think the question that a lot of folks have when they hear native is, how scalable is this? And, how can we replicate this across many folks? I'm going to have a leading question here and ask, what role in particular, and I know we're here at the IAB Marketplaces event, where do you see the role of marketplaces playing a role in helping create scalability for native programmatic?
Right, so look, it's right now the way we potentially may look at native is this new ad position maybe in the body of a page rather than on top or to the right rail. So it's a new place to insert the ad. But in the end of the day, it's just physical positioning on the page. It's just the real estate that you have access to. So today, if you think about just that stack, the content stack where you want to insert the ad, the scale is definitely not there yet. Especially at the type of scale you need to be able to create these kind of if-then statements to have this many variations for this thing to truly be programmatic. But what we did with this one, actually, we delivered into 300 by 600 ad unit. That's a very standard unit in programmatic. You can reach it scalably. You can find it in places where it's well positioned, and you get the same results. So instead of putting it in the center, we just put it the right.
So let me ask a question around data, because it seems like so much of this does revolve around sort of this rich data that, first-party data that Comcast has, other DMP data that you guys may be drawing on. Where do you see the trail of who owns what data and how it gets leveraged? Do you think that the publishers should be managing that data? Should you and your agency colleagues be the ones doing the intelligence gathering from the data? How do you sort of see us managing this role across all these different people in the ecosystem?
So because I'm on the marketing side, I'm going to say first-party data comes first. Clients like Comcast, who sit on a ton of data on their clients, the CRM level data, they can onboard, activate. That's great. When you're a client like Heineken, for example, that doesn't have a CRM data, we got to get much more creative about how do you create those first-party segments. But control and transparency is what it's all about. Understanding how the segment was created is at the core of understanding which data is right for you. Not all data is created equal. So if you know where the information came from, then you're that much better at executing the campaign. I'm not discounting the importance of publisher level data or third-party level data that can come to us from Axioms or Blue Skies or other platforms out there, but it's almost like you create a dossier of a user you want to go after. You start with what you know. And what you know is your first-party data. And then you keep adding on top of that. You keep adding additional information because you don't know everything about this person. And for whatever campaign you want to do, you may want to learn something you didn't know about before. So that information can come to you from your partner, like a publisher, or it can come from a third-party vendor.
Let's talk a little bit about the sort of creative side. So obviously, one of the things I've heard said is that in the era of programmatic, people have sort of lost sight of the importance of creative. Is it possible? How does native kind of bring the creative back into the equation again? What are some ways that you guys are seeing? Maybe I'll ask Craig that, because you're someone who's obviously seen that with some of your clients. How are you seeing native bring back the importance of creative?
Sure. Well, I think it's so easy to do programmatic badly, like just terribly. You just turn it on and it goes, and hey, look, there was our ad. So it does not remove us from having to really think carefully about what we're trying to do, which is what Oleg was saying, is to start back with what are we actually trying to achieve, and then which tools are most appropriate. And in the point of native, I do think, at least right now, we have this window of time where consumers aren't blind to it. They do see it, and we actually even see platforms and partners out there who are restricting access to different new units to make sure the creative makes sense, that it's not, that it's high quality, et cetera. I'm not saying everyone has the ability to do that, but I would say strongly that it's on all of us to make sure we don't just replicate the issues that we had in display, and something that we were talking about back then.
Yeah, Oleg, I want you to expand on that, because I know in the green room you were talking a little bit about not making the mistakes that we've made with display with some of these newer paths.
It's almost like there's this, whenever you try something new, you tend to fall back on what seems obvious, but it's not. When you go through a history and you've seen what worked, what didn't work, kind of going back and looking at it, it's important. For example, programmatic exploded, and we almost like conveniently forgot how important content is. Yeah. Because we needed scale, we needed reach, so it's like, yeah, it's all about the audience. Don't worry about the content. Well, that's not true. Absolutely, it's not true. Newspapers and print and magazines have been in business for 200 or however many years, selling messages next to a very specific set of content, and it worked. Native potentially can bring us back to that.
I think very much that we're finally getting out of the fascination phase with data and into the application, right? So when it was a very engineering-oriented, let's talk about how many peta, zeta, yada, et cetera bytes that there are, the marketers were bored out of their minds. They didn't care about that, right? What they care about is examples like this and other examples that we talked about. And so I'm optimistic that native is a tool that will be much more appealing to someone who's from a creative background, who's from a marketing background, and sees the potential.
And considering that these marketers are creating their own content themselves,
yeah,
you need to find new ways to distribute it, but leveraging the same methods. So you can have the same kind of guiding stick, almost the same methodology to measure whether what worked or what didn't work.
So before we open up to maybe a couple of questions from the audience, maybe I want to ask a little bit about what is probably the world's most powerful creative medium, video. So if we didn't have enough buzzwords up here with programmatic and native, maybe we can throw mobile into the equation somehow. But we were talking a bit earlier about video. Craig, what would native video even mean? What would programmatic native video even mean beyond just a great way to pitch a client on the next new thing?
I'll throw linear too.
Linear on top. Linear, programmatic, native, on demand. Honestly, I think you can look at what happens in a lot of the sports world as maybe not the best example of that, but something where so-and-so brought to you by so-and-so, you have that a lot. It's because of the time required to authentically get that done. It's just, first of all, the plumbing is just not there yet, right? So you can do it in a few different instances, and there are a lot of people standing on a lot of stages this week that will use that word programmatic and talk about what they're building for themselves, which is great. It's one step along a very long path. So unfortunately, I still go back to the whole, what are you trying to achieve? How do you do it? I don't think we're at a lack for tools out there. Mm-hmm. I do definitely see eventually that last domino falling into having the world unleashed upon linear, programmatic, native on mobile and television.
So do we have actual microphones for stage? So I can't quite see, but I'm going to open it up if there's any questions for either of our guests about programmatic native video on demand for linear TV, or anything on the programmatic native side of things. So while we maybe search for someone to ask, I'm going to ask you, Oleg. From your background in data, it seems like you've risen to your point of seniority as a data guy. Do you see that there's sort of these two cultures inside the agencies, and how do you see that playing out in this world? Programmatic being on the one side and native on the other.
Right. So again, historically, because maybe there were these kind of siloed understandings of it, it needs to come together. It needs to be part of because in-demo targeting is an old thing. This is just a more precise way of doing that. So connecting maybe those dots and simplifying in normal English, explaining that there's actually simplicity in concepts that we're trying to achieve. It's like an iPhone, right? It's very simple, very easy to use when you look at it, but there's so much science, there's so much genius that goes behind making that simple. So to me, connecting those two dots in the minds of people who may be a little worried of it, so when you're not comfortable with it, you don't want to talk about it, you don't want to implement it, that's my job. My job is educating and kind of simplifying why that thing is so important to you.
So I'm going to take an audience. Oh, we got a question here. Great, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to get actually a clarification on terms. As you know, the IAB Native Advertising Playbook identified about, Peter Minium can correct me, I think it's 1,700 variations of the word native. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about native for programmatic delivery in video environments, we're still actually talking about fairly rigidly formatted advertising. You're basically talking about in-stream programming, in-stream advertising in a video site. You're not talking about customized advertising, or are you? Because that's where I think there's been the biggest definitional disparity here. There's native, which in its original meaning 4 or 5 years ago was advertising or marketing communications that were very much customized to the aesthetics of a site experience. And then there's native advertising where in the Facebook era, Facebook mobile era, is in-stream. Mm-hmm. And in-stream is not a significant technical problem. There are technical issues there, but it's not a significant one. The idea of taking advertising and customizing it aesthetically for automated delivery to very, very different sites and very different experiences is something I'm not seeing anybody actually saying they can do. So,
and maybe to give some insight on that. So how many here, by a show of hands, are familiar with the OpenRTB spec? Okay. That's good. So the IAB has been a major driver in these standards for programmatic advertising. The OpenRTB spec, which is the dominant standard out there, and just a few weeks ago, the OpenRTB spec, the 2.3 spec, came out with a native specification. And in that native specification, they actually did define 7 creative formats, everything from a news feed to sponsored content to a suggested content sidewall creative. And the goal there really was to define in a standard way, instead of these 1,700 different formats, a standard set of a smaller amount. Now, it is very early days, and I'm sure there are a few of the marketplaces here in this audience that are looking to embrace that OpenRTB 2.3 spec for native. Oleg, you were going to say something around that.
You need some standards, right? If you want to deliver anything in scale, and if you bring the understanding of audiences into it, immediately the scale shrinks. So you need some kind of standards to be able to deliver it. But I think the custom content delivery is not just about where the ad is positioned, it's also who the ad is shown to. So even in video, delivering the video itself could be something standard, it's just something you pull off of a TV commercial. But the messages that you could potentially overlay the video with can become very, very custom. You can pull in content in that, and we've actually done a lot of work on that already.
This is not a brief for IAB standardization processes. It's obviously we're working on this as well. But that just sounds like an alternative set of formats that happen to be different from the formats that people used for the first 15 years of the internet. And this is, I'm driving this because I'm really trying to get to a clinical understanding of when we use the word native, what do we actually mean? Because the Rising Stars formats, many of them allow for the pull-in of custom information, custom feeds. Obviously, there's a separation between the formatting and the targeting, so you should be able to programmatically target any kind of format.
Right.
Again, with a little bit. So what is the difference? I think this is the question I'm trying to get at. When you use the word native, what is the essential difference between native advertising and formatted advertising? Is there any?
I mean, I think it's a terrible term. That's the problem. It's a horrific term that means 1,000 things to 1,000 people. When we were talking about the panel, someone asked me, it's like saying jumbo shrimp, and I said, no, it's not, because people know what jumbo and shrimp are, right? That's an oxymoron. In this case, native really has been around for a long time. It's just been resurfaced as a new way to further monetize experiences. Get it? It goes back to my arms race question about we're trying desperately to avoid hiding in plain sight. And some of these are much more stand out and catch notice. Now, in 2 years from now, we'll be doing something else, right? So I just have a hard time giving you a precise answer just because I don't think there is one, and maybe that's your point ultimately.
Let me ask this question to Oleg, though. As a data person, are these standards part of that? Are these standards important for you to explain to your clients what we actually mean when we throw these terms out?
Right now it's difficult to explain because I'm running into the same issue. I don't have a clear answer on that yet, obviously. Because native to a publisher, who's a content producer, means very, very different than custom content native to a marketer who produces content and wants to actually push it out rather than pull back into, like a publisher pull back into their world to show that example. So I don't have a clear explanation for that as well. But when we talk about programmatic, we think about precision, we think about efficiency at scale. So there must be some kind of standards, at least kind of some kind of simple enough definitions that you can work within. So that's where I think the flexibility hopefully will come from for us.
Do you guys see that? Is there a tension among some, when you work with publishers, is there a tension between things that are standard and things that are bespoke? Do you often find that there's a lack, for instance, maybe to take the Weather Channel as an example, or certainly we know the major social media properties. How interested are they in sort of conforming their creative units to something that could be bought anywhere out there on these various marketplaces?
I mean, in that example, it's a portfolio approach, right? So you do quite a bit of the custom stuff that's also supplemented by a lot of the stuff that is both standard but also can travel. Right? So I think that's the balance you have to find, is something that you have that nugget of really authentic, can only exist in one place kind of place, and then hopefully without too much diminishing of the effect, you try to drive that out and then perhaps bring people back.
So as a final question before we wrap up, I guess regardless of whether we call it native, programmatic, what maybe a bigger picture question for both of you as we depart is, what is really the goal of all these different technologies from the agency's point of view? ultimately, every year you're going to come to them with some new things. But underneath it all, how could you sum up what is it that you're really driving at for your clients when you present them these?
I'm going to say the same thing I started with. My job is to spend my clients' dollars as efficiently as possible. Leveraging whatever technology is at my disposal to do that, that's what it's going to be.
And I would only build on, the only build I would have of that is that it is incredibly important to be efficient. What we're trying to do, and I think what we need to do as an industry, is prove the efficacy, right? So as long as we focus, if the ROI fraction is top and bottom, we've spent so much time on the bottom that eventually the bottom's going to be zero, right? We need to have a lot more effort on the top, or we're going to, I really want to be in the business of growing my clients' businesses and their brands. That's what I want to do. And that's what I aspire to do. And I think that as a business, we need to get there.
And probably the best places in the world to get both a return on an efficient investment are marketplaces. So to all the marketplaces out here, thanks for helping make this next generation of buying possible. Thanks to Craig and Oleg for joining me. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.